Welcome to Tishrei 1, Rosh Hashanah, Kabbalistic Ideas and Practices. And the very first source we're looking at is from our oldest work of Kabbalah, or Proto-Kabbalah, depending on how you define exactly when Kabbalah begins. It's the oldest work of anything resembling Kabbalah we have, Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation or creation. And it's actually really beautiful and potent because within these few lines we have here about our upcoming month of Tishrei, we actually have hints and allusions to a lot of the major themes that we're going to see throughout the whole class, which are unfolding for many, many centuries after this text was written. So these few lines really do contain so much that's developed afterwards. So every month of the year, we're told in Sefer Yetzirah, is associated with a certain letter of the alphabet, the Hebrew alphabet, and also with a human faculty, something that people do like sleeping or eating, something like that, and also with a constellation, one of the star signs. So our month of Tishrei coming up, the month that Rosh Hashanah begins, is the month of Lamed, as it says in the first line, and also coition, which is how Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan describes sex, sexual intercourse, tashmish, and also the constellation of Libra, which in Hebrew, interestingly, is Maznayim, the scales. And when I looked this up, I realized that the symbol of Libra specifically is balanced scales, which is really interesting. We're going to keep coming back to this theme of balance and weighing things in the balance. I'll just say a couple of the associations of that immediately related to Rosh Hashanah are: it occurs shortly before the autumn equinox, the balance of the seasons, when the days are getting shorter and there's this like beautiful midpoint in the year. It's on the new moon before the equinox. And also the weighing of the scales relates to one of the main names of Rosh Hashanah in the liturgy and in the tradition, which is the Day of Judgment, Yom HaDin. And judgment is going to be a theme we're going to wrestle with during this class and keep coming back to. So it's all there in Sefer Yetzirah. We're going to see how these themes develop over the many, many centuries after that text was written and how we can apply them into our lives. So Rabbi Isaac Luria was one of the foremost Kabbalists of all time, really the father of modern Kabbalah. He's known as the Arizal. He lived and worked in Sfat in northern Israel for just 2 short years at the end of his life. But in those 2 years, he revolutionized Kabbalah. And his student, Rab Chaim Vital, wrote down the Pri Eitz Chaim, which is what the next text is taken from. And this is an amazing map through the year, a map according to the Kabbalistic qualities, or Sefirot. So some of you may be familiar with the tree of life of Kabbalah, where these qualities are also mapped onto the human body, and that the human is seen as a microcosm of the divine and also of the whole universe. So it's a map of people, it's a map of God, it's a map of life, it's a map of everything. And here we're being told it's also a map of time, it's a map of the year. He explains here which Sefirah, which of these qualities correlates to which festival. And if the Sefirot are new to you, if you're not familiar with them, this is a lot of new information. It won't necessarily all make complete sense, but I'll explain it as much as we need to for our purposes in learning about Rosh Hashanah, at least for now. So he says Yom Kippur is Bina, which is upper understanding, feminine understanding. It says Pesach, or Passover, is Chesed, loving oneness. Rosh Hashanah, our festival, is the awakening of Gevurah. So Gevurah is severity, boundaries, judgment also. Gevurah is used interchangeably with Din, which means judgment literally. So Rosh Hashanah is the awakening of that quality in the journey through all these different qualities throughout the year. Sukkot is Gevurah sweetened. Now Sukkot comes shortly after Rosh Hashanah, but in between them is Bina, is Yom Kippur, which is Bina. So the journey is from judgment or severity through some kind of understanding, and that upper understanding of Bina also is equated in the Kabbalistic sources with Teshuvah specifically. Teshuvah meaning returning to our best selves and returning to the divine. So through judgment, we get to some kind of Teshuvah, some kind of returning to our best self. And then we get to Sukkot when Gevurah, this judgment, this severity is sweetened so that it's ready for intercourse on Shemini Atzeret. And so on and so on. Shemini Atzeret, though, is important to know, is the last day of the festive cycle in this month of festivals. There's a lot of festivals, and that's the last day. Actually, in the diaspora outside Israel, there's actually is an extra day, but that's kind of an addition to the calendar that was separate to this whole Sephirotic map. But the work in terms of the Kabbalistic work of the time, Shemini Atzeret is the peak of it. And the intercourse the Kabbalists refer to here, they're talking about the union of the different parts of the divine and ourselves. We are microcosm of the divine, that we are facilitating through the spiritual work that we do, bringing together the masculine and feminine parts of ourselves, the lower and upper parts of ourselves, bringing everything into healthy interplay so that there can be creation of new life, creation of the new me, the new us, the new I, the new self that we want to be. So that's kind of where we're headed, to Shemini Atzeret ultimately, when there's going to be this culmination of this creation of new life through all these different forces coming together. And that's one way of understanding what Sefer Yetzirah was saying when it said that the quality of our month is actually tashmis, is sexual intercourse. That there's the creation of the world, which we celebrate on Rosh Hashanah, also relates to the creation of new life for each of us and in each of our lives. Now, that is a lot of Kabbalah, and that's a good place for a course like this to start when we're studying Rosh Hashanah. But now I'm going to rewind back to the Torah itself, our very earliest text, and look at what the Torah itself tells us about Rosh Hashanah. And we're going to discover it's actually not very much at all. And we're going to kind of build up the layers again, see how the Kabbalistic sources we just saw fit together with what the tradition does tell us throughout the generations. So in Leviticus 23, over the page, the Eternal spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the children of Israel, saying, in the 7th month, on the 1st of the month, you shall observe complete rest, a holy occasion commemorated with sounding the horn." So that's a Shabbaton, Zichron, Teruah. "You will not perform any mundane work, and you will offer up a fire offering to the Eternal." So it'll be a festival day like the other festival days when we'll rest, and we won't do our regular work things, and it will be Shabbaton, Zichron, Teruah, a day of remembering or consciousness of blowing the horn. Not that much. That's, one of two passages we have. The second passage immediately below. "In the 7th month, on the 1st day, there will be a holy occasion for you. You will not perform any mundane work. It will be a day of sounding the horn for you. Yom Teruah Yeh Lechem." That's pretty much it. That's the Torah on Rosh Hashanah. So we wouldn't know from the Torah itself that this is going to turn into a major festival that many, many Jews only go to synagogue a few days a year. This is one of the days they go to shul, or 2 of the days they go to shul. They turn up as if this is so important. The Torah itself really doesn't make that clear. Now let's see a completely different description of the festival, but still in the Bible, still within the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, from the books of the prophets. Actually, the later part of the Bible, actually, from the writings, from Ezra and Nehemiah. They were the leaders who led the Jewish people back to the land of Israel after they've been exiled in Babylon. So the people go back, they're rebuilding the temple, they're building what became the second temple, and this is what happened. On the 1st day of the 7th month, Ezra the priest brought the Torah before the congregation, men and women and all who could listen with understanding. Nehemiah, the Tirshata, Ezra the priest and the scribe, and the Levites who were explaining to the people, said to all the people, "This day is holy to the Eternal your God. You must not mourn or weep," for the people were weeping as they listened to the words of the Torah. So what's happened is the people have been in exile and they have forgotten the Torah. And now when they hear the Torah, they're crying because they realize they're very distant from it. It's a lot of information that is very hard for them to hear because it's very different to how they're living. And they are sad at the distance between their reality and what they're hearing. He further said to them, "Go, eat choice foods and drink sweet drinks and send portions to whoever has nothing prepared, for the day is holy to our Lord. Do not be sad, for your rejoicing in the Eternal is the source of your strength." Then all the people went to eat and drink and send portions and make great merriment, for they understood the things that they were told. Now I'm going to just open this up on the chat. I'd love people to jump in. What festival does that sound like to you? Eating, drinking, making merry, sending gifts. Does that sound like Rosh Hashanah as we know it today? Anyone have a thought about that? Purim. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. I think it's a very good description of how we celebrate Purim today. And growing up in a synagogue where Rosh Hashanah was oh so serious, I would never in a million years have imagined the Bible was going to tell me that actually Rosh Hashanah should be a little bit like Purim. And the story, the tradition, the liturgy, nothing about Rosh Hashanah suggests that association at all. But clearly there is a long and authentic heritage of this aspect of the day, as it says here, simcha gedolah, great joy being actually an authentic part of the day. So we're going to examine how that fits together with some of the themes of the day that seem to be less obviously related to joy, like judgment, for example, I mentioned before. So let's keep going. I'm going to look now at a beautiful Hasidic source from the Bnei Yissaschar. So he writes a whole beautiful Hasidic book about the calendar. Really, it's structured mostly on the months. So he tells us this about the months of Tammuz and Av, but he's actually commenting on Tishrei, which is our month. Rabbi Eliezer holds that the universe was created in Tishrei, and Rabbi Yeshua holds in Nisan. So I'll pause there and explain what's going on. That is an argument that happens in the Talmud, in the tractate called Rosh Hashanah, which is about things like Rosh Hashanah. And I'm just seeing a great message on comment on the chat about how in Israel Rosh Hashanah is quite festive. That's really true. I grew up in England where it's much less festive. You're right. Now I live in Israel. You're definitely right, Stacey. Yeah, definitely a good point. I still think it has this overtone of seriousness and judgment, though, that we're going to have to see how that fits together with joy. But yeah, thank you for that. And where were we? So Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, they're arguing in the Talmud, in the tractate called Rosh Hashanah. Rabbi Eliezer says the universe was created, the beginning of the Torah where it says God created the heavens and the earth, that happened in Tishrei, meaning the month we're about to go into, meaning autumn, fall. And Rabbi Yeshua holds that happened in Nisan. So these are completely different, really competing visions of what creation is. Right? One of them thinks that creation means when the days are getting shorter and we're actually turning towards winter and turning towards the rainy season in the land of Israel, turning inside, we're going to spend more time inside our houses and inside ourselves. And there's going to be a kind of womb-like experience, and then we're going to come out in the spring later. But Rabbi Yeshua says, no, creation means the coming out in the spring. It means, when the bunnies are born and they're bouncing around and when everything is flowering, that is the creation of the world. And it's a very, very long debate. Bnei Yissaschar is just referring to it briefly in passing here, but there are many, many pages of the Talmud where these two rabbis are going back and forth about this, saying, this verse from the book of Bereshit about creation supports my thesis. No, this actually the same verse can be said to support the other side. Back and forth for a long, long time. Eventually, we actually seem to come to the answer in the Talmud that Rabbi Eliezer is right, and actually creation did happen in Tishrei. But that is not the answer we're going to see right now. Right now, the Bnei Yissaschar is going to tell us that the Arizal, who is the Kabbalist we mentioned before in the 1500s in Sfat in northern Israel, who is regarded as really preeminent Kabbalist, he says that this one in action and this one in thought, meaning Tishrei is actually the creation in thought, and Nisan is the creation in actual manifestation. So he's saying that they're both when the universe was created, but he's saying just like with a human being, there's a kind of conception, and then there's a period of gestation. So too, the universe was conceived in both meanings of the word, in thought and also in terms of creating something in a womb by planting a seed. And then there was a gestation period, and then there was actual birth in the spring when the bunnies are bouncing around. I'm just going to pause and go to the chat. I see there's a bit of a conversation going on. How did the holiday become morbid and heavy? That is a good question, which is a little beyond the scope of our discussion right now. But I think in the course of the class, we will see a lot of sources about judgment, and we'll get a bit more of a picture, and we'll also see how it can be interpreted in different ways. How are you sure that thought is Tishrei and deed is Nisan? So Stacey, excellent question. I'm only sure of that because I went and looked up the original source in the Arizal from Rabbi Isaac Luria that he's referring to. And that is, otherwise it wouldn't be obvious because he actually switches the order. So excellent paying attention there. I appreciate your textual acuity. And now we're actually going to see that the answer we just saw given in the name of the Arizal was actually given by somebody else before. And now we're going to see a beautiful teaching that builds on that idea and puts it together with another ancient teaching and produces a really beautiful thesis about Rosh Hashanah for us. So it's putting together a lot of different pieces. We're kind of building up the building blocks one by one. So first of all, we had this idea that was the universe made in Tishrei or was it made in Nisan? The Arizal said it was conceived in Tishrei and then actually blossomed creation in Nisan. And now, Hashem Shmuel, a slightly later Hasidic master, is going to tell us that actually Rabbeinu Tam also gave the same answer. In the first few lines of the next teaching, he says, these are those of the living God. This is quoting from Rabbeinu Tam. In Tishrei, the thought arose to create, but it was not created until Nisan. So who's Rabbeinu Tam that he's quoting? He's one of the Tosafists, he's a commentator on the Talmud, who is living in the 12th century in France. And actually, he's the grandson of Rashi, who is the greatest, most famous French medieval commentator who we're about to quote. So there's this beautiful tradition when the Talmud is printed, Rashi's commentary is printed with the Talmud itself on the page, and the Tosafists, many of whom are Rashi's relatives, descendants, is printed also on the page on the other side of the text. And so when you learn a piece of Talmud, it's possible to see literally a family argument happening at the same time about what the Talmud means. And that is what we're going to see now a little bit, the teachings of these people in the same family reflecting on each other. They're being compared later by the Shemu Shmuel, this Hasidic master. So he started by quoting Rabbeinu Tam, who said the same thing that we saw before in the name of the Arizal, which is, in Tishrei, the universe was conceived, and then it blossomed into creation in Nisan. Great. Then the Shemu Shmuel brings a new teaching. This is comparable to a view espoused by Rashi on the verse, in the beginning, Elohim created the heaven and the earth. So that is Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim et haaretz. That is the first verse in the Torah. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth, but it uses the word for God, Elohim, which, as I wrote there in square brackets, relates to din or judgment. So the whole first chapter, in fact, of Genesis, of Bereshit, only uses the name of God, Elohim. It does not use the four-letter name of God yet. And our tradition, going back to our very earliest ancient rabbinic commentaries, says very strongly and clearly that Elohim relates to the judging, more severe part of the divine, whereas the four-letter name, Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, that relates to compassion. So when we put those together, then we get a balance and the synthesis of those. But that doesn't happen yet. In the first chapter, we just get Elohim and judgment. Rashi writes, it does not say Yud Hey Vav Hey, relating to Rachamim, created, for initially, now he's going to explain why. For initially, it arose in God's thought to create the universe with the attribute of din, judgment, but when he saw that the universe could not endure in this mode, he placed the attribute of Rachamim, compassion, first, and joined it with the attribute of din. So basically, God is like mucking around in God's laboratory, making universes for fun. That's actually something else. Some of the ancient Midrash says that God made lots of universes and then destroyed them. So God is making universes, and God thinks that it's a good idea to make a universe according to rules, because like you need rules for things to function well, right? So din seems like a helpful thing when you're making a universe. But then God has a change of heart, a change of mind, and realizes if God made a universe only according to judgment, it would not endure. So he had to put Rachamim, compassion, first, join it with the judgment, and then the universe will endure. Okay, that's Rashi's teaching. Actually, it's an ancient Midrash, an ancient rabbinic commentary that he is quoting, which he quotes on his commentary on the Torah. So now we have two different ideas about how the universe is conceived in Tishrei, but it is born in spring, and how the universe was originally conceived with din or judgment, but then was born with a healthy mixture, a balance of compassion and judgment. And the Shemu Shmuel is saying this in the next line, this idea from Rashi is the same as that mentioned by the Tosfot, that's Rabbeinu Tam, that it arose in thought to create in Tishrei, which is the constellation of the balanced scales, Libra, and the scale of divine weighing, a time of din, but the universe was not created till Nisan, which is the month of Rachamim. So he's saying these two teachings are actually the same. The universe was conceived in both senses in judgment, but actually manifested with compassion. And that's what the scales of Libra represent, is this time of weighing and judgment, but not a time yet of manifestation. The time when the bunnies are jumping around and everything is being born, that comes later at springtime. Just going to pause and check the conversation on the chat. Beautiful. Iranian Jews have a Seder, first night of Rosh Hashanah. Thank you for that, Judah. So there was never a time of pure din judgment. Stacy, that is such a good and timely question. So we're going to see in the course of the class a lot of sources about the judgment that does happen on Rosh Hashanah. And in short, there is a careful balancing act throughout our tradition that our sages want us to experience judgment in a helpful, useful way that really makes us look at our deeds and look at our lives honestly and do that hard spiritual work. But there seems to be a lot of concern not to take that over the top and let it be unhealthy. So there's a real back and forth throughout the centuries about how harsh that judgment is, how severe it is. One of the strains of conversation in the Kabbalistic sources, interestingly, says that the reason Rosh Hashanah is 2 days is because we need 1 day of pure, straight, harsh judgment. And then the second day is judgment mixed with compassion. We're already kind of beginning to go out of judgment into a more positive and balanced mindset and experience of the month, moving towards the forgiveness of Yom Kippur and ultimately the coming together of different elements we saw before that happens on Shemini Atzeret. So that's one way the Kabbalists map the journey of this time. That is in the Zohar originally, and then Rabbi Isaac Luria also talks about it. If people have questions, Miriam or anyone else, you're welcome to type them on the chat. Never a bad time. Or you can say them. That's fine too. Oh, yeah, sure. You can unmute.
Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Okay. I'm actually here with my friend. Her name is Miriam also. She's not on the screen, but she's the one who typed in the first question. So We've been kind of like discussing it. And we had 2 questions that we wanted to share.
Great, please.
So, you want to go with the first one?
I'm just a little confused about the starting. You said that the day of the year is typical. And then you said that the first book of Torah is the year. And then you said something like you want to read the work of the judgment. And then
Miriam, we can't hear you right now.
Oh. You want to come? Can you hear us?
I can hear you really clearly. I'm afraid I can't hear your friend. Sorry.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Come a little closer. She's coming.
Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, a little quietly, but if you speak as much as you can, please.
How about now?
It's not super clear.
Not so great. I don't know. You can hear me though?
Yeah, I hear you great.
It's really weird. Okay, I'll see if I can try to explain this question. So I think if I understand, originally you were saying that he started out the world creating it with judgment, right, and then realized that wasn't going to work. So he switched to compassion and then incorporating judgment into the compassion.
That's right, yeah.
But actually in the text for Rosh Hashanah, what we see is the din first. Like we see that we don't see any compassion. So if he initiated with kindness and then added in judgment, why do we only see the judgment for this whole first chapter?
You mean the first chapter of Bereshit, of the Torah?
Yeah.
Right. Good question. It's not evident. So the Midrash which Rashi's quoting is saying that whole first chapter, that whole story of creation, was how creation was conceived, but not a full description of how it manifests, and therefore there needed to be a chapter 2. The second chapter of Genesis or Bereshit is actually the real actual creation. So that's how that Midrash would read the Torah. It would say chapter 1 is Tishrei, creation with judgment, din, and then chapter 2 is creation and compassion in Rachamim, which happens in springtime. Which, by the way, chapter 2 is when we see the 4-letter name of God, and that's connected to compassion.
So the creation of the world happened in the second chapter.
So the actual creation happened in the second chapter. Did the 7 days of the week happen in the first or second chapter?
That's the first chapter. But the reading is that everything in the first chapter is a conception, a blueprint, a thought, but it didn't quite fully manifest yet. That's it's a difficult reading in some ways. It's definitely not the plain meaning of the text, but that's what our conversation does. That's what our tradition does with these texts, right? It layers the conversation through the centuries, sometimes being selective with the reading to make the point it wants to make.
Okay, so I have a question on top of that.
Please.
So my understanding, this is like a prior understanding, was that God first created a world with judgment and it actually collapsed. And then he created a world with compassion first. Like, so that would imply that there's this concept of like creating the world with even in conception of judgment, that wasn't, like, my understanding was that wasn't the case. And also like kind of on a parallel track, it's like if God created the world to, like, for love and unity and all the things that we like to think, then like why would he even start the conception with judgment? Like, I don't really, do you know what I mean? Like, if anything, he would be like, oh, here's a loving universe. Oh, wait, that's not going to work unless we have boundaries. Okay, institute boundaries. That's just a function of the end goal, which is love. But if he's starting out with judgment, like, that does kind of reinforce the thought of like God as like a fire and brimstone. Like, so I'm struggling with that.
Okay, well, that's a fair thing to struggle with, and that's a very fair approach to the text. But another way of looking at it is the rabbis who are writing that text are looking around them at a world which contains enormous suffering and injustice and severity and what they consider to be divine judgment that is harsh. Right? Suffering is just such a unavoidable part of life. Right? They're looking around and they're seeing that, and they're trying to reconcile that with their hope and their belief that ultimately there is a loving God. So they're trying to understand, if God is all love, how come life is so hard and there's so much suffering? So this is one of their attempts to make peace between their reality and their hope that there is a loving God.
So there's more proof to the contrary?
I mean, in one, from their perspective, there was plenty of reason. I mean, and I think still for a lot of people today, looking around the world today, there's a lot of reason to say, well, yeah, if there is an all-loving, infinite creator, how come life is so hard for so many people and other beings, right? How come there's so much suffering in the world?
Probably because of the judgment.
Right. And then what is the relationship between that harshness, that struggle, that difficulty, that judgment, and that love? So this is one attempt to tell that story. I'm gonna ask for the sake of time that we move on, but obviously I'm really happy to continue the conversation later. I just want to leave time for other people's questions and also for the other sources on the sheet.
Thank you.
So that was the Shem Shmuel bringing together those two teachings from Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi, saying the universe was conceived in din, but then actually flourished into creation with compassion. Something that we can think about as we're going to study the sources about judgment, about din later in the class, and think about what it means to have a judgment that is directed towards compassion. That's really a key theme I really want us to reflect on for our Rosh Hashanah experience. Now we have another source from the Shem Shmuel, shorter this time, which I want to compare to the one we just saw and ask you how you think it fits together. It says the 7th month, Tishrei, is the most suitable time for creativity. But that is when a person's fruits emerge. For a person is a tree of the field, the Torah says. Just like in material matters, that is when the fruit of the tree finishes ripening. Now, by the way, the Torah doesn't say a person is a tree of the field. The Torah actually asks, sarcastically, rhetorically, is a person like a tree of the field? But we have a very long, old tradition from the Midrash onwards, from the rabbis, to read that question actually as a statement and to use it to say, actually, people and trees are parallel and similar, and there's a lot of similarities between us. So he's saying, just like a tree has finished producing its fruits at this season, at the end of summer going into autumn, so too a person has, and that this is therefore a great time for creativity. And I want to ask, what is the relationship between the creativity he's talking about and the judgment that we've been talking about, we've mentioned many times until now? Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Just seeing a couple of things on the chat from Alex. We're suffering over our life and timeline. Right, we're all suffering in our life and timeline, exactly. So Stacy, is Asiya creativity or productivity? Repeat the question. Oh, sure. So the question was, we've seen a lot about judgment already, and we're going to see more. And that this is a time, Rosh Hashanah is Yom Hadin, the day of judgment. And the Tishrei is a time when the world was conceived in both senses in judgment. And here, in the next source, the Shemesh Shmuel is saying, this is a time for creativity because our fruits have finished ripening. We produced all the fruits of the past year. At the end of the summer, we gave all the fruit we had to give. And now, as we go into autumn, we go into a new cycle, is a great time for creativity. And I want to ask, and there doesn't have to be an answer right now, what's a relationship between the creativity here and the judgment? Miriam is saying, my experience has been the judgment has been stifled by creativity. Thank you, Miriam, for naming that. So that is, I think, most people's normal experience of judgment, that it doesn't necessarily help creation. I think one of the reasons we struggle so much with Rosh Hashanah is because judgment has a pretty bad rap and is often unhealthy and unhelpful to our creative process. And what the Shemesh Shmuel is saying here is actually the experience of this time of Tishrei is supposed to be one that helps us create new life. And the next source is going to help clarify how that works. The short quote from a very powerful teaching from the Eish Kodesh, or the Pizetz the Rebbe of the Warsaw Ghetto. He says, Zman Teshuvah, hu Rosh Hashanah, the time for Teshuvah is Rosh Hashanah. Zman Briyat HaOlam, the time of the creation of the world. V'itnei shegam Teshuvah Briyat hu. Because Teshuvah is also creation. So Teshuvah means returning to God, returning to our best selves. And the Pizetz Rebbe here is saying that actually to return to our best self is an act of creation. And that therefore, just like the trees have given their fruit and now they're going to go into a new cycle of life, so we too need to go into a new cycle of creativity at this time. And that judgment, I'm seeing things on the chat about this now, it's great, I'm going to come back and see what you guys write. I'll just finish my sentence. Judgment is a necessary stage, our tradition is saying, for having a healthy process of recreating ourselves. Something about that judgment is necessary. Let's hold the question why and see what you guys have written on the chat. I think now, this is Stacy, I think now we are having done a lot and are perhaps at the end of a cycle, and the judgment is the evaluation of all those deeds. Perfect, beautiful, that's it. The year is done, and it's an assessment. It's an honest assessment. See what else other people wrote. Lizzie wrote, judgment is needed in order to focus our creativity. We need to judge and get rid of some things for new things to grow. Beautiful, exactly. You need to assess and judge to know what to focus on next, to know what you want to carry into the new year, to what you want to create in the new year. Beautiful. It's a great time for renewing. Beautiful, Alex. Frederick says, we should keep in mind our perception of judgment is not what the ancient people would have understood. Right, for sure. We're trying to work out what it means throughout the tradition at all different stages, but also for us. Thank you, Frederick, for reminding us of that. There, we're always asking the question, what did it mean then, at all these different points in time, and also what it means for us today. Alex, we have the opportunity to start from the beginning. And Stacy, I like that Teshuvah is creation. Right, so just to mention, Rabbi Soloveitchik, I didn't quote it here on the sheet, but he also talks extensively about Teshuvah as creation in the book Halachic Man. And Rabbi Soloveitchik is not a chassid, but he is actually very steeped in Kabbalah in his own way. I did quote in the next little passage of italic text, Rabbi Jill Hammer, who's a wonderful teacher. She writes in her Jewish Book of Days, second paragraph of this lump, born from a seed, the tree bears seed. The land spends itself to create what will thrive next spring. We use the growth of past seasons to sustain the new one. Rich with the fruits of the year, we prepared to be winnowed down to a single seed, the new beginning of our lives. I just think she writes it so beautifully. I think she puts it so clearly. We have created fruit over the past year, and now, just like fruit in the world around us, the fruit is going to be winnowed down to a seed. And the question is, what is the seed that we want to take with us into the new year? And as I think it was Lizzie said on the chat, the judgment means assessing and focusing and choosing what we want to carry forward, what we want to create in this new year. So I've written a few more questions there in that section, which I'm not actually going to read out now for the sake of time. We're going to move on, but those are there to help you reflect on everything we've learned so far and to think about how to bring it into your own experience of Rosh Hashanah. Now, if we want to finish at anything like 10 o'clock, we have to move pretty quickly. And we might overrun a little bit. I'll do my best to balance, not rushing too much and doing justice to some of what we've got here. In the next section, section 2, judging kindly, we're going to explore din, which we've mentioned a lot so far, judgment, and see how there's a lot of balancing going on with rabbis between having a real experience of judgment, but making sure it remains healthy and doesn't stifle our creativity, as was mentioned on the chat, that it can be unhealthy sometimes. So how can we keep that balance? This is a beautiful midrash from Besikta de Rav Kahana. It says, it gives the story of the creation of humanity hour by hour. It says in the first hour, this happened, the second hour, this happened. There's all the different stages of creation of humanity, hour by hour on the first day, all about how God made Adam. And then I'm skipping down to near the end. And it said, in the 9th, he commanded. In the 10th, he transgressed the command. So this is Adam being told, don't eat from the tree. And then he did eat from the tree. And in the 11th, he was judged. So Adam ate from the tree and then he was judged. In the 12th, he left from before God with a positive judgment. So on the last thing that happens in this story is that Adam is pardoned. Because Adam was originally told, if you eat from the forbidden tree, you will die. That will be the end of the human experiment. But it wasn't. He was just exiled from the garden. The Holy Blessed One said to him, Adam, this shall be a sign for your descendants. Just as you entered before me in judgment and left with a pardon, so too your descendants shall enter before me in judgment on this day and leave with a pardon. And by the way, just to say, I've translated it as pardon, but really it means a positive verdict. And one way of reading this source is that getting kicked out of Eden is actually the best thing that ever happened to people, because that's the beginning of when we really began to be free agents in creation and have real free will in the way that we know that we have it today, and that we can really act in the world in a meaningful way. Whereas Adam and Eve in Eden, everything was given to them on a silver platter and it lacked that meaning. So this is the story of Eden retold through the lens of the rabbis when they're thinking about what judgment means on Rosh Hashanah. This was what happened on the day that humanity was created, which is Rosh Hashanah, right? Humanity was judged and given a positive verdict. So that's the context for the judgment of Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is a day of positive judgment, right? And God even says explicitly in this midrash, just as you entered before me in this day and left with a positive verdict, so too that will happen for your descendants in the future. Now, you have to read the next text because it's one of the main sources for why this festival of Rosh Hashanah is a day of judgment. So we need to grapple with it a little bit. It says that 4 times the world is judged: on Pesach for the crops, on Shavuot for the fruits of the tree, on Rosh Hashanah all the inhabitants of the world pass before him like sheep. As it says, he that fashions all of their hearts, that considers all their deeds, verse from Psalms. And on Sukkot they are judged for the water. So we pass before God one by one on this day for some kind of assessment or judgment. And sure enough, also in the Zohar over the page, it says, Pesach is the right arm, Chesed, Abraham, and Rosh Hashanah is the left arm, Isaac, which is the arm of judgment, of din. So when the Kabbalistic qualities or Sifirot are mapped onto the human body, the right side is the side of kindness and the left side is the side of judgment. So there's no denying or getting away from this judgment, but we are going to look at it in the context of that first midrash, which says, don't worry, it's going to be a positive judgment ultimately if we do the work sincerely. Now, the next source is also classic source about how this judgment happens, and this is often referred to in the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah. It says there are 3 books opened on Rosh Hashanah: one of totally evil people, one of completely righteous people, and one of the in-betweeners. That's Bein Onim. And the rabbis say most of us are the in-betweeners. Most of us are not completely righteous or completely wicked. But that means that our judgment is actually suspended until Yom Kippur. And then actually the rabbis say it's suspended again until the end of Sukkot. And there's even a tradition that it's suspended again until Hanukkah, and so on and so on. So we are, most of us, in this state of trying to experience an honest judgment that can be healthy and helpful to our creative process, but not necessarily going to get a final verdict. But it goes back and forth. Some parts of the liturgy are quite strong, like, for example, Netana Tokef, I mentioned there in the text, where it talks about that Yom Hadin and who by fire and who by water and so on, which, Leonard Cohen uses in his song. But then again, we have a lot of texts in our tradition which make it clear that we're supposed to be connected to the great joy that we mentioned in the book of Nehemiah, when it was describing how the sages then encouraged the people to celebrate the festival. So let's look at another midrash from the rabbis and see Yalkut Shimoni at the bottom of the page. It says, what nation is like this nation that knows the nature of her God? Usually, when a person must appear before the court, they wear black clothing, cover themselves in black, and let their hair grow and their nails grow. They do not know the outcome of the judgment. But not so Israel, who wear white clothing, wrap themselves in white, cut their hair and nails, and eat and drink and rejoice on Rosh Hashanah, knowing that God, blessed be He, does miracles for them and produces a favorable judgment for them, tearing up their degree of harsh din. So we are celebrating Rosh Hashanah as a festival rather than doing what we might do if we were expecting to be condemned by a harsh judgment, because we are expecting a miracle. We are expecting something miraculous to happen through the process of going through these rituals, going through these rites of, yes, entering into some kind of judgment, but doing so within hopefully a healthy and loving framework. We are expecting something miraculous to occur that's going to lead us to Yom Kippur, to forgiveness, to that quality of Bina that the Arizal mentioned, of upper understanding. And this is even reflected in the halakha, in the law relating to the day, the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law over the page. It says, we eat and drink and rejoice, and we do not fast on Rosh Hashanah, and also Shabbat Shuvah, the Shabbat after it. However, we should not eat to satiety in order that we not become lightheaded. The awe of God should be on our faces. So this actually is a really helpful statement. It says, essentially eat, drink, and be merry, literally, is what he's saying, right? But also the awe of God should be on our faces, right? And so somehow that balancing act is for us to find our own healthy way through, to make this season real and powerful, and again, for the judgment to be one that really helps us in our life rather than hinders us, as we talked about. And next midrash is just so, I find really helpful in actually doing the inner work of what this means. This is a really ancient midrash from Exodus Rabbah, Shemorah. It says, Israel says, Lord of the universe, you have said to us, house of Israel, like clay in the potter's hand, you are in my hand. Even though we sin and make you angry, do not abandon us, for we are the clay and you are the potter. That language of us being like clay in the potter's hand is one that's echoed a lot in the liturgy of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Come and see, this potter creates a jug and leaves a stone in it as it is taken out of the oven. If someone puts liquid in the jug, it leaks from where the stone is and the liquid is lost. Who caused the jug to leak and lose its contents? The potter who left the stone in. So let me just pause for a second and go back to the chat and ask you guys, what is that saying about people and what is it saying about God? And you can jump in, you can unmute your mic if you'd like to just say it, or you can type it, whatever you like. Raises the issue of responsibility, definitely. Say more. What's the kind of plain, if you had to paraphrase what the Midrash is saying, does it say what its plain message is? How would anyone could unmute and say it? How would you say it? Maybe I read it too fast. Sorry. Maybe I paraphrase it. Oh, wait. It's not our fault you made us this way. Brilliant. All right. Thank you so much. That's exactly it. So God is the potter, right? God made this piece of pottery that has a leak in it. As the Midrash says at the end there, who caused the jug to leak and lose its contents? The potter who left the stone in it, right? So as Stacey says, this raises the issue of responsibility, meaning I don't think our tradition wants us to go to the extreme of saying we don't have free will, we don't have responsibility, nothing is our fault, it's all just God's fault, everything is just the way it is. A kind of blind fatalism that's really not consistent with anything in our tradition that I know of. I think our tradition very strongly emphasizes our responsibility. But on the other hand, when we're applying judgment, I think it's really healthy to bear in mind the context, which is we're supposed to be created in the image of God by God. So if there is stuff about us that is not perfect, it is a reflection of how we were made, right? The choice that God made in the way that we were made. And this is something we're not going to have time to go into too much in this class, but there's a certain absurdity and humor to that, right? There's a certain surreal humor to even the idea of judgment in that context. Like I'm gonna be judged. Like who's judging me and how, right? The idea that God is so perfect and beyond everything, yet at the same time it was God that made me this way, right? It's kind of funny, it's kind of absurd, and actually we have texts that wrestle with that absurdity. If anyone's interested, I'll be happy to send you them after. The next source is very brief and just really puts that idea in a nutshell from the Maggid of Mezrich, the great Hasidic leader. He says, all who judge Israel are judging the blessed God, as it were, but he is unified with us. Meaning, when you judge people, you're judging the divine, because we're, as I said, we're created in the image of the divine by the divine. So any judgment that is overly harsh, that doesn't take all of life into account, is not entirely healthy and constructive. We need to keep that big picture really front and center when we're applying the judgment. That hopefully is going to help us be more creative and recreate ourselves in the best possible way. I'll just pause there for any thoughts or comments people may have on any of that before we move into section 3. No? Okay, that's great. Do jump in if you want. Otherwise, section 3, guidance for practice. So this is when we take some of the ideas we looked at and we actually see practices that can let us bring it into our real experience of Rosh Hashanah, our day-to-day lives, and really enrich the festival for us. So the Baal Shem Tov, the founder of the Hasidic movement in the 1700s in Ukraine, he says, all of the thoughts falling on a person on Rosh Hashanah are the writing in the books of life, death, or Beinonim, the in-betweeners, whether for good or bad, God forbid. The evil thoughts need to be sweetened through battling our evil impulse, which is bringing these thoughts down on us, through awakening our free choice or through self-sacrifice. But what's he talking about? We said before, the Talmud said that there were 3 books open on this day, a book of life, a book of death, or the in-betweeners who will have a suspended sentence. And that most of us are the in-betweeners with a suspended sentence. And the Baal Shem Tov is saying something very radical, because that passage from the Talmud seemed to imply that we were going to be written in one of those books by God or one of God's angels and so on. And this is also talked about in the liturgy for Rosh Hashanah. The Baal Shem Tov is saying the writing in those books, which decrees which judgment we get, is actually written by the thoughts in our head. And he describes it as the thoughts which fall into our head, because we don't necessarily choose our thoughts, but what we can do, and this is what he's alluding to in the second half of the teaching, is condition ourselves to make ourselves more prone to having a certain kind of thoughts, right? And this is what he means when he says we can battle our evil impulse and awaken our free choice and perform self-sacrifice. So I'm going to talk more about the free choice part, because I think it's easier to relate that to our milieu today. I think when I have a meditation practice, I teach meditation, and part of the practice of meditation is looking at what's going on inside our heads and inside our bodies, and getting to a place where we can see it a little bit more clearly. We can see, oh, look, that's leading to that, and I'm thinking about that, and I'm feeling about that, and look what's happening. And eventually getting to a place where I can actually choose what to do with things rather than just reacting to them from a place of passive victimhood. Now, of course, there's still some passive victimhood happening, but if I'm doing the practice right, there's more freedom and more choice than there was before. That's really one of the gifts that the practice gives us. And we know the Baal Shem Tov perform practices like that. I think here that's what he's suggesting that we do. He's saying, if you want to have a good Rosh Hashanah, you want the writing to be in the right book, in the best possible book, then you need to have the best possible thoughts. So we need to have practices that can support us looking honestly at our thoughts and working with them in healthy ways, rather than just reacting to them. Our next source from Kedushat Levi is a slightly later Hasidic teacher. He says, there was a king who sent his only son to a distant land, for some reason known only to him. As time passed, the son became accustomed to the ways of the villagers among whom he lived. He became a coarse person, and he forgot the niceties of life with the king. Even his mind and his innermost nature grew coarse. One day the son heard that the king was going to visit the province where he lived. When the king arrived, the son entered the palace where he was staying and began to shout in a strange voice. His shout was in wordless sound, since he had forgotten the king's language. When the king heard his voice, and he saw that he had even forgotten how to speak, he was filled with compassion for his son. This is the meaning of the voice of the shofar. Compassion is capitalized because it's rachamim, this Kabbalistic quality we've mentioned a few times already. So the shofar is saying here is this primal scream of somebody who has forgotten language, somebody who's regressed to a very, very primal state, but they still know how to scream and cry out. And there's an invitation here for us, if we want to know what it means to connect deeply to the root of who we are, to the creator, to life, there's an invitation here to consider going to that place in ourselves, beyond language, just to sheer primal cry, and to experience the shofar as that, and to let the shofar help us get to that place. That's one possible practice we can bring into our Rosh Hashanah. There's another couple, and then we'll be done. We're going to the last page. So this one is from the Maggid of Mezrich, the successor to the Baal Shem Tov, great Hasidic leader, from his student Rav Avraham Chaim Zochlau. Says, "Raise your voice like a shofar." That's a verse from Isaiah. This means that a person needs to consider themselves as nothing, with no merit or good deeds. Even though they may have done some mitzvot and good deeds, they have only done these things with the strength of the blessed divine, with his intellect, with his kindness and his goodness, which he bestowed upon them. So in other words, just like a shofar needs somebody to blow into it to make a noise, otherwise it's just empty and doesn't do anything. So we too, we may be so proud of all the good things we've done, but actually anything good we did was only the divine doing it through us. This is a kind of healthy counterpoint to some of what we've been seeing so far, which put a lot of emphasis on how nothing was our fault and so on, because we were connected with the divine. So this is saying the same is true the other way. If we're intimately connected with the divine, then so too, anything good about us is also done through the divine, with the divine acting through us. In other words, I am Godding right now. You are Godding right now. God is Godding through each of us. And therefore, it's silly to be proud or egotistical about how good anything I may have done may be. And that's one thought and practice to bring into our experience of Rosh Hashanah. And he gives another practice here in the second paragraph. Also in their prayer, they should think that the world of speech, the Shekhinah, the feminine divine presence, is speaking through them. And their thoughts are the world of thought, of Chokhmah, of wisdom. And they are like a shofar, which has no voice except that which is blown into it. Hence, raise your voice like a shofar. So this is now an invitation to practice every single time that we pray, not just on Rosh Hashanah, to think that my speech is actually the divine presence, the Shekhinah, flowing through me, and that my thoughts is the world of thought, which also comes from the divine, flowing through me. In other words, not to identify with what I'm thinking and saying myself, but to be aware that God is Godding through me, both in my thoughts and in my speech. There's something bigger than me flowing through me, just like a shofar that is being blown, that the air is flowing through it, and that's what's making the sound. So that's a practice invitation, which is very powerful for prayer at all times. And just moving to the conclusion now, I'm going to end with the theme of beginning. Jerusalem Talmud says, God says to us, because you came before me in din, in judgment on Rosh Hashanah and survived, I consider you as if you have been made into new creations. But that really sums up so much of what we've been looking at, that there is this healthy, hopefully healthy self-assessment with the aim of recreating ourselves, that we're going to do teshuvah, returning to our best self, returning to the divine. And that is an act of recreating ourselves to be the people we want to be this coming year, to choose what is that seed that we want to winnow the fruit down to choose what is the seed that we want to plant this year, what is the seed we want to plant to create the fruit that we want to create, right? That's what's going to happen, hopefully, if we have a good Rosh Hashanah. And the Kedushas Levi says, the word for blowing the shofar also means striking or inserting, as in, he struck the socket of his hip. That's from when Jacob is fighting with the angel. This means that this form of service that we call the shofar should be embedded always in your hearts and always be new for you, as if you have never begun to serve God at all. So what's going on is taka, which is related to the word tekiah, to blow the shofar, tiku. The root taf, kuf, ayin, taka, means quite a few different things. It means to strike and also to insert, as he says. And he's saying what it means for us is blowing the shofar is related to inserting or embedding something in our heart. And what is it we should embed in our heart? It's the call of the shofar, which should remind us that our service for God should always be new. And he carries on, this is the meaning of sing a new song to the Eternal. Shiru Lashem Shir Chadash, that you will sing a new song constantly. Hainu shetashir shir chadash tamid. Right? So it's not enough just to say, okay, Rosh Hashanah, I'm going to renew myself, I'm going to be a new person. There's actually a deep emphasis in the Kabbalistic tradition being brought down here that we should be trying to renew ourselves always, that we should be trying to bring practices into our lives that should remind us to constantly start over and over again. Just Rosh Hashanah is really the most auspicious, powerful time we have for doing that and for shaking up our whole routine, for reminding ourselves what it means to do that. And it's such a great opportunity. Just going to go back to the chat and see if anyone is adding anything. Oh, great. Yes, please. Deborah, that all links to self-sacrifice, reducing the ego. Oh, beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, that is one of the connections between the different things. The Baal Shem Tov mentioned the self-sacrifice as well. Exactly. Thank you very much. Stacy, God can make the whole, but I can help to fix it. A partnership. Beautiful. Exactly. So that's such a great summary. The whole rabbinic tradition, including the Kabbalistic tradition, really sees everything people do as a partnership with the divine. It's not us or God. It's always a symbiosis of the two. And we even say, it says in the Talmud, when we observe Shabbat properly, we are partners in creation. We are fulfilling God's creation. And when we judge a court case justly, we are God's partners in creating a just world. So in the same way, when we do our bit to judge ourselves in a healthy way, again, in a way that helps us recreate ourselves the best we can be, we are helping to fix ourselves and fix the world. And that's what the Kabbalists call Tikkun Olam, fixing the universe. That's the original context for Tikkun Olam. Thank you. Beautiful. Any other questions or comments? Feel free to unmute if you'd like to just say something. Otherwise, you can type it too. Thank you, Alex. Shana Tova also to you and everyone else. Great. Well, lovely learning with you. Thank you all for the people who did comment and question. It was really wonderful making a bit more of a conversation. Hope you enjoyed it. And Shana Tova. I hope everyone has a wonderful Rosh Hashanah and a really wonderful new year. And I'm going to send out this recording. Bye-bye. I'm going to send out the recording of this class to everyone who registered. So you and everyone else. Audio and video. So that'll be helpful for people too. Have a great week of preparation for Rosh Hashanah and Shana Tova. Take care.